Good evening. Welcome to tonight's program. I'm Bill Lacey, Director of the Dole Institute of Politics. Tonight's event is a result of a three-way collaboration between the KU English Department through their John F. Eberhart Excellence in Writing Fund, also the William Allen White School of Journalism, and the Dole Institute of Politics. I would like to refer to you to the back of the program for a list of the Dole Institute's upcoming programs. Beginning tonight, we'll be sponsoring 3 Pulitzer Prize winners before the end of the semester. Of particular interest is the November 1 presentation of Richard Ben Cramer's titled What It Takes. Cramer's book is the best volume on presidential candidate character that has been written and earned him a place on the list of the top 100 pieces of U.S. journalism in the 21st century. He has unsurpassed insight into the makeup of Senator Bob Dole, and I strongly encourage you to make plans now to be at the Dole Institute that evening. That's November 1. Let me also remind you that last week, many of you were probably here to see former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. If you missed it, you can watch it on KTWU, public TV out of Topeka on October 10th at 9 p.m. You can also get it on the www.doleinstitute.org website in the streaming video area. Now, before we get started, let me pose a question. I want to know how many of you called the Dole Institute sometime over the last 2 months concerned about getting a seat tonight. Raise your hands. Okay, that's what I thought. You're all here. We appreciate your input, and we acted accordingly. I'm glad that the Lead Center was available and that we could accommodate you, and I thank you for helping us know that we needed to make that move. So please feel free to do that at any point in the future. Let me also give you my soapbox speech on Q&A. We'll have 2 microphones set up. We'll be doing Q&A after Mr. Pitts' remarks. We'll have the 2 microphones set up, as they always are, here at the aisles. So please go and queue up at one of those microphones if you want to ask a question. And secondly, please ask a question, no speeches. Filibustering is not allowed. Our guest tonight will be introduced by Professor Janet Sherestanian of the English Department. Dr. Sherestanian specializes in modern American literature, feminist criticism, and the connections between literature and history. She is the editor of the Oxford University Press editions of Willa Cather's novels, The Song of the Lark and My Antonia. She is the founding director of KU Women's Studies Program and the Research Institute on Women. Her awards include the Outstanding Woman Teacher Award, the Burlington Northern Foundation Faculty Achievement Award, and the Edward F. Greer Award. Please welcome Professor Sherestanian.
I want to begin by acknowledging the Department of English, the William Allen White School of Journalism, and the Dole Institute of Politics for sponsoring Leonard Pitts' appearance at KU, and to single out the John F. Eberhart Memorial Fund for Excellence in Writing, the auspices under which the English Department initiated his visit. Mr. Pitts is an outstanding journalist whose syndicated column for the Miami Herald won the Pulitzer Prize in Commentary in 2004, in addition to over a dozen other awards from professional groups. But first and foremost, he is an excellent writer. Leonard Pitts writes with a strong, clear, highly individual voice that skillfully maneuvers between informal, colloquial speech and formal written language. Unlike some other columnists who trade in insider knowledge or mouth received wisdom in prose replete with cliches and hackney phraseology, he treats the medium of the English language with respect and imagination. Mr. Pitts uses his voice to take definite stands on controversial subjects that are important to our national life, subjects such as the death penalty, religious intolerance and political obfuscation, the negative effects of black culture on black children, the centrality of minority history to the history of us all, what we have not learned from 9/11, and the absolute importance of civil liberties to our society, which will be our subject tonight. He does so not to appeal to the converted or exclude those who disagree with him, but to provoke a thoughtful response. He has a superb sense of how to speak to a broad and diverse audience, often using an unexpected comparison or image to defuse anger with humor. His columns are not simply ends in themselves, but also contributions to civil discourse, both because of what they are about and because of how they are written. Mr. Pitts accomplishes all of this in the limited space of a syndicated column and in the face of a continual deadline, turning out in the process polished prose worth remembering and saving. With thanks then for his writing, please join me in welcoming Leonard Pitts.
Wow. Thank you very much. Thank you, first of all, for that warm welcome, for that gracious introduction. I am a little bit overwhelmed. Last time I saw a theater like this crowded, I think the Temptations or somebody was performing. I am honored to be here with you this evening. I have a friend who graduated from a university, I understand you have somewhere near here, who told me that if I wanted to win friends and influence people, my first words out of my mouth should be, how did she put this? Rock, chalk, Jayhawk. But I told her I wasn't going to do that because I'm not the type to kiss up to people, so that's not going to happen. I am especially honored to see such a crowd, especially considering how mean I've been to Kansas on occasion. In my column, when certain of your politicians have, tried to make your schools teach that the planet is flat or whatever it is they're working on. I think one of the more memorable lines was, if I lived in Kansas, I'd be catching a plane to anywhere else so fast my shadow would have to take a later flight. So, and I feel, I really liked that line when I wrote it, but now I feel kind of guilty because, because here I am in Kansas and all you nice people have come out, and it was such a, I was proud of that line, but I'm still proud of that line, but. Anyway, again, I thank you all for coming out. If you saw the posters on the way in, it says that I'm here to talk about civil liberties in the wake of September 11th, 2001. Actually, the speech has a pithier title. The speech is called "The Home of the Brave," and I'll tell you why it's called that in a moment. But I want to begin with what Colin Powell said on September 12th, 2001. Because for my money, it was one of the best and most inspiring things that any public official has said in a very long time. Now, we all remember what it was like on that day. Dust was still rising from the destruction site that had been the towers of the World Trade Center. There was still a hole in the Pentagon, and United Flight 93 and its passengers and crew still lay in pieces in a field in Pennsylvania. We were shocked and dazed that day, lighting our candles and waving our American flags and crying and trying to understand the awful thing that had been done to us. And we were scared. Some of us said we would never go into a skyscraper again. Some of us said we would never get on an airplane again. Some of us never wanted to leave our houses again, never go into public places again, movie theaters, shopping malls, amusement parks, where they, this evil, faceless they, could murder us en masse. This had fundamentally changed everything, we said. Laughing seemed like something that belonged to another world, to a more naive time. So did ice cream cones, pop music, and romantic comedies. Our lives, we said, would never be the same again. And it was at that moment that Powell, this old soldier turned American, turned chief diplomat of the country, gave his country a good, stern talking to. He told us to get up, get out, get back to work, get back to our lives. He said, and I quote, "We cannot be a people who walk around terrified. We're Americans. We don't walk around terrified." It was one of those statements that puts a little iron in your spine and a glint in your eye. It was brave, uplifting, encouraging. It was everything but true. We're Americans. We don't walk around terrified. I would submit to you, what have we been since September 11th but terrified? I mean, there is more to being an American than going back to work, than going back to the malls and going shopping after a national tragedy. To be an American, in the largest and fullest sense of that word, is to sign on to a series of ideals so fundamental that they were written into our founding documents. Like the line that says, quote, "Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition government for a redress of grievances." Or like the line that says, "In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense." Or like that other line that says, "The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue, but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the person or things to be seized." These guarantees are not incidental to who we are. They are not minor elements of the reason this country is the envy and the dream and the goal of people around the world. No, these are the core of us. And yet, according to a Bloomberg Los Angeles Times poll that came out in January of this year, 51% of us would be willing to give up those guarantees if told that doing so was necessary to keep us safe from terrorism. It is, I am sure, just coincidence that President Bush was reelected in 2004 with 51% of the popular vote. "We're Americans," Powell said. "We don't walk around terrified." Yes, we do. And because we do, the people in our government for whom civil liberties are an inconvenience get away with murder. Behind our backs, before our faces, it really makes no difference. Or don't you remember the outcry that didn't happen when the nation rounded up Arab men, including Americans, and held them without charges, without lawyers, without access to courts? Don't you remember all the people who shrugged and said it was okay with them when it came out that the administration was eavesdropping on phone calls made by American citizens in direct violation of federal law? Don't you remember the controversy that did not erupt when it was revealed that the Patriot Act empowered the government to look into the books you've been checking out at the library or buying at the store? Don't you remember the way that people ignored the news that the government had pushed newspapers not to publish transcripts of Osama bin Laden's rantings? And maybe you say, yeah, but that's the war on terror, or if you prefer, the war on terror. That's the war on terror, and the government's got to have some leeway to protect us from people who are trying to kill us. Last thing you would ever want is to see a cloud of radioactive contaminant spread over some major American city because you were a stickler for your rights. Maybe you could make that argument if indeed this were only the war on terror. But as you know, if you've been paying attention to the news, the people for whom your civil liberties are an inconvenience have hardly limited to the war on terror their efforts to subvert the law, silence dissent, and manipulate the public's right to know. There is, for instance, the 2004 episode where U.S. Marshals, reportedly at the behest of Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, seized and erased recordings that were being made by two reporters covering a speech that Scalia was giving on the Constitution. Or the 2004 report from the General Accounting Office that the administration, the Bush administration, violated federal law when it disseminated to TV news stations videos made to look like news reports that spoke favorably of a new Medicare law without ever revealing that this so-called news report came from the government. Or the controversy from 2002-2003 when Roy Moore, Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court, fought to force the display on court property of a rock bearing the Ten Commandments. Or the 2004-2005 episode when the President of the United States, the Governor of the state of Florida, and the United States Congress went to extraordinary lengths to interfere in the right of a Florida man to make end-of-life decisions for his incapacitated wife, Teresa Schiavo. Or, and this is my personal favorite, the 2003 arrest of a man named Stephen Downs at a mall in Albany, New York, for wearing a T-shirt that said, and I quote, "Give peace a chance." Or the 2004 Democratic and Republican conventions, which required demonstrators to do their demonstrating in so-called free speech zones. Cyclone fences topped with razor wire far removed from the convention halls. One of my students who was at the GOP convention told me that even the top of the enclosure was fenced off. And excuse my ignorance, but I thought this whole country was a free speech zone. I kind of thought that was the point. Take the incidents separately, and maybe you can shrug them off as isolated instances of poor judgment. But take them all together. Take them with Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo, and Armstrong Williams, the columnist who was bought and paid for with public funds. Take them with secret prisons and torture and a myriad of lies and spies and alibis. And you have to say, if you are a reasonably open-minded observer, that there is a pattern here. That, understatement? That there is a pattern here, that these different officials in these different episodes, in these different jurisdictions, all display a similar mindset. The people for whom civil liberties are an inconvenience see their moment. They are emboldened and they are on the move. Indeed, a few months ago, two men wearing baseball caps identifying them as Homeland Security walked into a library in Bethesda, Maryland. As patrons went about their business, the men announced loudly that it was forbidden to view pornography on library computers, whereupon they challenged one patron about the website that he was viewing, and they asked him to step outside. Instead, a librarian got between the security people and the patron. The police were called, and Homeland Security was asked to leave. I wrote about this episode in a column earlier this year. In that column, I quoted Benjamin Franklin's famous dictum, which is getting a lot of work out these days. They that can give up essential liberty to obtain a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. This was en route to making an argument that our freedoms are being nibbled away, some of us would say gobbled away, in the atmosphere of fear that has come on us since September 11, 2001. And I wondered aloud why so few of us seem to notice or to care. I was saddened, but not really surprised by some of the responses that I received to that column. Some folks thought it should make a difference to me that the men turned out to work not for the federal government, but for the State Department of Homeland Security. My response is that the government is the government, and anytime the government purports to tell me what I can and cannot see, I get a little worried. Some abhorred what they saw as just another godless liberal, L-I-B'-R-A-L, a godless liberal attack on our courageous, esteemed, and visionary commander-in-chief. My response is that the president's supporters are too often like little children, sticking their fingers in their ears and singing nonsense syllables to avoid hearing truths they would rather not hear. Finally, some people thought, freedom's all well and good, but, there's got to be some limits, because if that guy was indeed looking at pornography, well, that's a different thing. As one writer put it in a letter to the editor, quote, if Pitts had a daughter communicating with a pervert or a son getting hooked on porn at library computers, he would see what is happening. Liberty does not ensure unlimited license, particularly at taxpayers' expense. There's a Mark Foley joke in there somewhere, but you can write your own. I just want to say that response stuck out for me because it was such a cop-out to pretend pornography was the issue. For the record, not only does Pitts have a daughter, Pitts has 5 kids. And it's not hard to understand or even to share people's apprehension at the thought of some dirty and disheveled individual in a long trench coat sitting at the library terminal getting his jollies while little kids go by reading Curious George and Dr. Seuss. That's enough to give anybody the willies. But also, for the record, and this is interesting, nobody seems to know just what the unnamed library patron was looking at on his screen that day. I've spoken to the reporter who broke the story and to the library where it happened. Nobody seems to be able to tell me what website the guy was visiting. Was it www.drunkensluts.com or www.femaleanatomyforartists.com, both of which feature pictures of women in the nude, but otherwise have very little in common. For that matter, nobody could say whether the man was visiting a website that featured any nudity of any body at all. And while I'm adding things to the record, let me also add this. This whole problem of patrons looking at pornography at public libraries to the discomfort of patrons around them, that it doesn't exist. Left to their own devices, you will find that people have a way of working things out. So as the newspaper reported, there's one county in the Washington area that allows adults to view sexually explicit material, but asks the customers, if they're going to do that, please be considerate of others. And apparently that's worked out okay for them. There's another that ensures customer privacy by recessing the screens of the computers so that they are difficult, if not impossible, to be seen by anybody except the patron who is using them. But again, as the president of the American Library Association told the Washington Post, there's generally not a lot of people going to public libraries to look at pornography to begin with. And if you think about it, that makes perfect sense. People do not go to public libraries to look at pornography for the same reason that a guy who buys Hustler magazine at a newsstand in the airport generally does not open it on the plane. Think about how many times you've walked into the newsstand, you see all of these magazines to be bought by people ready to get on flights, but I fly once a week. I've never seen somebody in the back, in the seat with Hustler magazine open. The reason is simple. It is difficult to, and let me phrase this, delicately. It is difficult to get the full entertainment value out of that product while seated next to somebody who looks like your grandmother. So you say then, okay, so what is the bottom line of what happened in Bethesda? The bottom line is a bunch of people willing to surrender their freedoms in order to solve a problem that isn't a problem at all. Sounds an awful lot like the nation at large. And the incident in Bethesda is a great microcosm because it illustrates vividly this tendency we have to voluntarily jettison our unalienable rights as soon as they become inconvenient, as soon as they permit offense to be given, as soon as the people for whom those rights are an inconvenience whisper the right scare words in our ear. Pornography, pornography. Ooh, terrorism, terrorism. Ooh, take my rights away, please, Mr. Government Man. Just keep me safe. Keep me safe, Mr. Government Man. We're Americans, we don't walk around terrified. God bless you wherever you are tonight, Colin Powell, and I wish that were true. It needs to be true because I'll tell you something. America is not for wimps. Freedom takes guts. That's because freedom is a messy and often problematic thing. Sometimes it is a downright dangerous thing. And we need to quit being so quick to whine and surrender and act as if the mess and the problems and the danger were some kind of betrayal or evidence of some kind of flaw. They are, in fact, part and parcel of the deal that we signed up for. Anybody can believe in freedom when freedom is used for nothing more controversial than to say that I love Mom, God, and apple pie. But if you purport to believe in freedom, to be about freedom, then one day you're going to confront a man who wants to be free to walk in lower Manhattan wearing an Osama bin Laden t-shirt, or a newspaper that wants to be free to publish an image that is sure to inflame and insult the adherents of one particular religion, or a woman who wants to be free to say there was no Holocaust, or a man who wants to be free to burn the flag. And that flag and the freedom for which it stands means nothing if it is not broad enough to encompass those things too. At the risk of repeating myself, freedom is messy business. It is also an act of faith, because to embrace it, you have to believe that while some of its byproducts will inevitably be ugly and hateful and even frightening, the preponderance of its byproducts, the preponderance of what human beings say and do when they are allowed to say and do anything they want, that preponderance leans toward good. Otherwise, what is the point? Now, I understand that there are emergencies and extenuating circumstances and times, particularly times of armed conflict, when survival itself is at stake and there isn't always time to observe legal niceties. But I also understand that it is easy to claim extenuating circumstances where none exist, and that if you are one of those people for whom civil liberties are an inconvenient thing, an emergency provides perfect cover for taking those rights away. I understand, too, that these are fearful times when some of us feel that there's no price we wouldn't pay for security. But I also understand the words attributed to Dwight David Eisenhower, son of Kansas. If you want total security, go to prison. If you want total security, go to prison. There you are fed, clothed, given medical care, and so on. The only thing lacking is freedom. And I understand, too, what George Bernard Shaw meant when he said liberty means responsibility. That is why most men dread it. For all of that, though, the electorate's fear is only part of the problem. What troubles me as much or more is the news media's fear and the way it has undermined the public's right to know. In our case, it isn't so much fear of terror, I think, so much as it is fear that if our reporting is rigorous and contrarian and asks rude questions and demands hard answers, people won't like us anymore. They'll call us names. They'll say that we are bad people. That fear is not without its basis, of course. For some, it has become an article of faith since 2001 that those who question the motives, strategies, actions, and competence of the Bush White House are unpatriotic, un-American, unintelligent, godless, mindless, hopeless Bush bashers, conservative haters, terrorist sympathizers, and of course the most profoundly hateful epithet those folks can come up with, liberal. And those people vow to cancel their subscriptions or change the channel, and you know that they'll do it because we live in an era where you have the ability to choose the news that reinforces your political bias, so why bother with that which challenges or stirs or demands that you open your head and actually think? So this threat to make do without us carries weight, especially in an era when newspaper readership and profit margins are shrinking and the broadcast market is fracturing. So what to do? What to do? Simple. Show some guts. Do the right thing. Ask the rude questions anyway. Seek the hard answers anyway. Struggle to adhere to the highest tenets of this profession. And I realize, I've given this speech a few times before editors, and they always, give me a jaundiced look because, that's an easy thing for me to say as someone who does not have to meet a payroll or juggle a corporate budget, but I insist on saying it anyway. I would rather go down knowing that I did the right thing than to prosper knowing that I did wrong. Or to put it another way, I don't think it's too much to ask that we titans of American journalism show at least as much courage as the Dixie Chicks. I am reminded of the story of Jeanette Rankin. For those who don't know, she was a Republican representative from Montana, first woman elected to Congress. She was also a pacifist. And when Congress convened to vote for a declaration of war shortly after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, she was the only member of Congress to vote no. People were so outraged that a mob chased her down, and she had to take refuge in a phone booth in the Capitol building until police could come and escort her to safety. I have always respected Jeanette Rankin for that. It is not that I agree with her position against the war. Even so revered a pacifist as Martin Luther King Jr. once said that he would have put aside his beliefs to serve in World War II if called. So clear and present was the danger, so monumental was the evil. But the thing that I like about Rankin was her willingness to take the unpopular stand, to say the unpopular thing, to stand up and question the cause that everybody else was for. Because it seems to me that when you have a mass of people all agreeing that a thing is true, that an action is needed, it is a short distance from there to an unthinking mob. Everybody validating everybody else, everybody going along with everybody else. So it's important to have that person who's willing to be wrong, willing to be rude, willing to say, wait a minute, hold on, I don't buy it. That is the function that news media are supposed to serve. It is the function we have, by consensus, largely failed to serve in the days since September 11, 2001. There have been exceptions, yes, but by and large, reporters who had been energetic and aggressive in pursuing the details of a previous president's liaison with an intern named Monica Lewinsky and his involvement in a real estate investment called Whitewater, turned acquiescent and sluggish as his predecessor began to lock people up without charges or trial, began to speak of torture as an acceptable means of interrogation, passed laws abridging the civil liberties of citizens, manipulated the truth and propagandized the public, and of course, led the nation into a war against a nation that had not struck us based on questionable readings of questionable intelligence, 23,000 casualties to date. There ought to be limits to freedom, quote unquote, there ought to be limits to freedom. Candidate for the U.S. presidency, George W. Bush, once famously said that. At the time, maybe you took it as a gaffe, yet another tongue cramp from a man justifiably famous for his unfamiliarity with the English language. But doggone if he didn't mean it. And it will go down as one of the signature failings of the news media in the early 20th century that we did not challenge him sooner and more aggressively than we did. Where were the intensive coverage and indignant editorials when Arabs in America were being rounded up en masse, when newspapers were being pressured by the White House to alter their coverage of Osama bin Laden, when the White House and its surrogates first branded dissent as treason? It is a failing that stems from the top of my industry, as witnessed the extraordinary mea culpa 2 years ago from the most influential newspaper in the country. Speaking specifically of its coverage of the run-up to the war in Iraq, the New York Times said, quote, "Looking back, we wish we had been more aggressive in re-examining the claims as new evidence emerged or failed to emerge. Looking back, I wish a lot of us had been a lot more aggressive." But what is that expression? If wishes were fishes, we'd all cast our nets in the sea. Yesterday is dead and gone, says an old song, and tomorrow is out of sight. The only thing we own then is now. It is a little better now, let me say that. Coverage of the administration's claims and activities seems more energetic, more skeptical, and more focused, less timid than it was. It probably helps that the president's poll numbers over the last year have eroded like a Florida beach. It probably helps, too, that the debacle of Hurricane Katrina laid the administration's incompetencies bare to the degree that no one could possibly ignore them. But the question I wonder about is, what about next time? Next time the country is hit, next time American flags sprout in American front yards, next time a frightened electorate wants, understandably, to rally around its leadership. Will we remember the lessons of the World War II era, the McCarthy era, this era? Will we commit them to institutional memory, or will we allow them to fade, forcing them to be relearned by some generation not yet born? Now, I realize that all of this may sound to some ears like more of the same, another liberal broadside on the bastions of conservatism. I would say in response that I dearly wish that we could get beyond that false and tired paradigm that has been so lucrative for Ann Coulter, Bill O'Reilly, and Rush Hudson Limbaugh III. I'll tell you the honest truth. I have nothing against conservatism, at least as that term was defined in my youth. Spending restraint, strong national defense, personal responsibility, foreign policy pragmatism. In fact, putting aside its rather dubious record on race, conservatism, the kind that I grew up with, offers a number of things that I can agree with wholeheartedly, or at the very least, disagree with respectfully. But this thing they call conservatism now, this loud, anti-intellectual self-righteousness, this arrogant moral relativism that finds civil liberties inconvenient, that whines and pouts and feels put upon when it cannot get its way, that covers itself with Bibles and wraps itself in flags, and is brutally intolerant of anyone who doesn't do the same, that is another matter. And I reject the charge that says calling its adherents on that represents bias. Let me say it again. I don't believe any political philosophy, liberal, conservative, or any shade in between, has a monopoly on truth or intelligence or decency. In fact, I tend to reject political extremes of both sides out of hand because extremists, by definition, are closed-minded and unthoughtful. But it's my contention that this specific fear news media seem to have of being called biased against so-called conservatives has made too many of us timid, mealy-mouthed, and too eager to embrace a false equivalence. We are called upon to be fair, yes, but fairness does not require us to suspend judgment. And the plain fact of the matter is left and right are not always created equal. I want to tell you about a study. It was done by Drew Weston, who's a psychology professor and a commentator for NPR. He put his finger on all of this in a piece that he did for NPR in 2004. He told of a cable news anchor who had introduced a piece on the claims that weapons were missing from a munitions dump in Iraq. The anchor then tossed it to talking heads from the left and the right to offer their interpretations of this story. But there was, said Drew Weston, actually nothing to interpret. There was no claim the weapons were missing. The weapons were, in fact, missing. So you have to wonder why the anchor could not say that. Why did he need to cover his backside with an interpretation of a verifiable and verified fact from both liberal and conservative flanks? Because anything less would be biased, right? And then there's the way that some of us wring our hands, some of us in news media wring our hands over claims that we are skewing the story in Iraq, overdosing on the bad things that happen and failing to adequately report the good. Not that media cannot be guilty of skewing a story, this one or any other. But whenever I hear that claim, I flash back to a 2004 New York Times analysis. The paper analyzed one typical month in Iraq. The paper found that the country was sustaining terrorist attacks, shootings, car bombings, landmine explosions, grenade attacks, mortar strikes at the rate of 76 a day. Iraq is roughly the size of California. Are you telling me that if California was suffering 76 terrorist strikes a day, every day, there would be even a question that our top story should really be Governor Schwarzenegger cutting the ribbon on a new hospital? Yeah. How seriously would we take the person who made that argument? Would we give him or her equal time in fear that otherwise we would be called biased? Or would we say, California is being blown up 76 times a day, open your eyes? Again, fairness and judgment are not mutually exclusive. As I said, I named this speech Home of the Brave, which is, of course, a line from our national anthem as penned by Francis Scott Key. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? I named it that because that struck me as a telling conjunction of words, the land of the free and the home of the brave. You see, I don't think that we have distinguished ourselves by our bravery in this era. 51% of the electorate willing to suspend its own civil rights in exchange for the illusion of security because they are scared of terrorists, and some untold percentage of the media willing to suspend their role as the watchdog of American democracy because they are scared of giving offense. It is time all of us grew a spine, because there is one unalterable truth about being the land of the free and the home of the brave. if you don't have the guts to be the one, you will soon cease to be the other. Thank you. Thank you. Whoa. Thank you. I understand there are microphones back here on either side on the ground floor. You folks that are way up there in the nosebleed seats, I don't know what to tell you. But there are microphones, I believe, on either side here if anybody has a question or something they want to talk about. Yes?
Okay, my question is, and I've wondered this for a long time.
Uh-oh.
Yep. When are you going to put your columns in a book so we can buy them?
It's on my to-do list. You know, we shopped a proposal a few years ago, and there wasn't a whole lot of interest. We, meaning me and my agent. You know, a lot of things have happened since then, including September 11th, including the Pulitzer, and including suddenly rooms full of people like this. So, you know, maybe we'll take it back to him and say, hey, you want to reconsider this? You know, I get asked about it everywhere I go. I can barely see. Is there anybody over here? No? Yes, there we go.
Mr. Pitts.
Yes, sir.
I thank you so very much for having a spine and being brave and courageous tonight. Our country needs that desperately.
Well, thank you.
I wonder, and I don't always read every one of your editorials. I'm sorry to report that, but that's true.
My wife doesn't read any, so don't worry about it.
I'm truly and sincerely wondering tonight if you've heard of another gentleman. He happens to come from Oklahoma City. He's a United Church of Christ pastor, and he's issued a minister's manifesto for taking back your faith, your flag, and your future, better known as Why the Christian Right is Wrong. And it's one of the most powerful books I've read in so many years. Maybe you reviewed that in your columns, and I just haven't seen it.
What's his name?
Robin Myers.
I don't know him, but I'll keep an eye out for the book.
It's well worth the read. I'd even pay you to read it. It's that important.
I would get fired so fast, but thank you anyway. But Robin Myers.
Myers,
I will
Why
go
the Christian Right is Wrong. And he's also, besides being a senior pastor.
I will do the Amazon.com check for him. Thank you. Yes.
Mr. Pitts, thank you so much for coming to Lawrence. It's a little
having
blue
me.
dot in a sea of red here.
So I've been told.
I just wanted to say, how do you get your ideas? Because we read you aloud in our house every time you appear in our local paper, and we always find you so insightful. Just wondering from a writer's perspective, does the news move you? Does your family move you? Or where does it come from?
All of the above. Essentially, in looking for a topic for a column, you're looking for something that catches on the gears of your mind and won't let you go. There are different things are important to different folks. But what I'm usually looking for is something that engages me emotionally, whether that makes me angry, whether it makes me laugh, whether it makes me exasperated or whatever. But I always like to write things in which I have some sort of emotional investment.
Thank you, sir. Please
You're
come
welcome.
again.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay, you complained that President Bush said that there ought to be limits to freedom. And I might be a narrow-minded conservative, but it seems like that goes without saying. For example,
It seems like what?
That goes without saying. I have the right to free speech, but I do not have the right to heckle and yell during your speech. And so it seems that unlimited freedom is anarchy, and I was wondering what point, if any, do you think that freedom should have limits?
I thank you for not heckling and yelling during the speech. And I don't know that that's a matter of freedom of speech so much as it is civility. The president or the candidate at that time made that comment in response, and this is what really makes it sort of troubling to me, made that comment in response to a gentleman who had put up a mock website, I think it was gwbush.com, and put up a website that was patently unfriendly to the president, and he was very upset. Instead of laughing it off, which would have been the smarter thing to do, and he said there should be limits to freedom. And frankly, freedom, political freedom or freedom of speech was designed specifically for incidents like that, to allow the electorate to poke fun at or to criticize its commanders, or it's the people who want to be its commanders. He wasn't even the president at that time. That's specifically what freedom of speech was created for, to allow us to speak back to our leaders and would-be leaders. So for him to say that was an awful thing. In terms of what limits I think there ought to be on freedom of speech, I think the limits should be matters only when we're dealing with matters of pressing urgency, matters of life and death. The old test that they use often, of course, is you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, and thank you for not doing that either. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater, but beyond that and matters similar to that, I am in favor of very few limitations on freedom, because otherwise, what is the point? What is the point? If life and limb are not endangered, then, say what you want to say and I'll say what I want to say, or I'll go away from you and turn off the channel if what you're saying is too obnoxious for me.
With everything that is going on, and there's I think, so much rich material for commentary, and do you ever find it hard to decide what to write about because there's so much? Well,
yes and no. It's a feast or famine situation. Sometimes, there's three things that are demanding attention, and you've got to figure out which one you have the most investment in. And then some days there's nothing but crickets chirping, and you really have nothing. There have been a lot of, just sort of dry days. So it's never just right. It's always too much or too little. Never fails.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes.
What medication do you take to keep from feeling hopelessly depressed or totally outraged? Actually, the serious part of the question is it your research and writing that helps you from those feelings? And secondly, any suggestions to those of us in Kansas as to what we can do?
In answer to the first question, what I usually take, I try to take a dose every night of Comedy Central with Jon Stewart, The Daily Show. Which really has a way of venting my head. What can those of us in Kansas do? It's your state. I don't know. I mean, I gave you my line about the first plane out and my shadow catching a later flight. I mean, I don't know what else to tell you. What was the middle part of that? There were three parts to it.
Is it your research and writing that just helps you overcome the outrage, depression?
Yeah, the writing, helps to vent your head. I remember, I've thought often that if I did not have this column, my blood pressure would be somewhere, north of the sky, because they're just, especially now, especially the last 5 years, there's so much craziness that goes on, and it's not like it's hidden craziness. There's craziness you've got to seek out. It's craziness that's right there in front of you, and people just sort of walk right by it like it's not craziness, And that just really frustrates me. So, writing the column, I think, is sort of cheap mental health insurance, if you really want to know the truth about it. Yes?
Yes, hi. For my question, I tuned into the Tavis Smiley interview a couple months ago that aired, and I really enjoyed that. You've been called outspoken, arrogant, honest, and controversial.
You've been talking to my wife, huh?
Yeah. But as a minority in the field where there are very few, can you share with us the relationships won or lost among your colleagues prior to and post being awarded the Pulitzer Prize?
I'm sorry, the relations between?
Your colleagues as you were moving up through the ranks and receiving...
You mean white, black, and otherwise?
Yes, just your colleagues in general.
My friends that were my friends are my friends. Still, I don't know if there's been a big difference. It's one of those things where I think people expect a certain change out of you, but, I'm the same I'm the person that I was. At least I hope I'm the person that I was. I never think about it unless other people bring it up, and that's the honest to God truth. I still hang out with the same bunch of crazy folks that I always hung out with. So, and I don't think that they've changed much toward me, with the exception of I think that there's a tendency to want to defer to you more, from people in the organization, and that gets kind of troublesome. I think it's something they think that you want or that you desire, and I've never asked for that. Treat me like you treated me, before, and that's fine. But this whole thing of being deferred to sometimes gets a little bit weird. As a columnist and as a writer, you're trying to keep your head on straight, and you're trying to make sure that your perceptions are grounded in something like reality. People start, if you allow people to start treating you like something else, I think that can endanger, not just your relationships with them, but also your ability to do your job. If ever you start sitting in the ivory tower, flinging down wisdom received from the mountain or whatever, I think you're in trouble. I really think you're in trouble. So,
Thank you.
Yes.
Good evening, Mr. Pitts. Thank
Good
you so
evening.
much for being here.
Sure.
I enjoy your column especially because there are sometimes on a particular topic I'm not quite sure how I feel, and you often bring a little bit of humor, quite a bit of an intelligent aspect to your discussion on particular topics. And since you are in Kansas tonight, and it's home of the brave and land of Fred Phelps, I'd like your opinion on in general, your reactions, because I'm sure they'll be pithy, but also particularly in regard to his plans to picket the funerals of the Amish children that are being buried in Pennsylvania.
A lot of folks didn't know that, I guess. I just learned it today. I think that Fred Phelps, we talked about the extremes. I think he is the most extreme of the extremes. He's, Pat Robertson looks like sane next to this guy, which is really a bad sign. I mean, I wouldn't want to go to, beg pardon, Groucho Marx. I wouldn't want to go to any heaven that would have him. That's the honest truth. It's funny. I'll tell you something. I wrote a column earlier this year, really trying to call him out when the news broke that he was picketing military funerals, and the column was sort of a tongue-in-cheek thing that made the argument that Fred is secretly gay. And I was really trying to get a rise from him, really trying to, just poke through him or whatever. And what was fascinating to me and what told me a lot about their character, they never responded to that column. They put it on their website, though. They put a link to it on their website, without comment, without saying, look at what this sleazy person has done. It's just without comment, which tells me that, for him, it's about the publicity. It's about getting his name in the paper. And I didn't think it was possible to think less of him, but I was wrong.
And just one more comment, if I could.
Thank you.
To show you how open-minded we are here at KU in Lawrence, Kansas, when I took a computer class a few years back, his grandson, Ben Phelps, was my TA, and he was the designer of that website.
Oh, really? Ooh. Creepy. Yes.
Hi. You didn't address this in your very outstanding talk, so I wanted your opinions and thoughts on the subject. Since 9/11, there's been what's been euphemistically called the militarization of Mayberry, the increased use of paramilitary tactics and equipment by local and state law enforcement simply because Department of Homeland Security funds are available for equipment and training for SWAT and things like that. And this has resulted in military police instead of civilian police not being aware of civil rights and issues like that. And I was curious if you'd know.
I wasn't really aware of that, but I am aware of this whole idea of giving equal homeland security protections to, let's say, Lawrence, Kansas, and Los Angeles, California. And I think that that's, with all due respect to Lawrence, Kansas, I think that's a little bit more of the false equivalence that we have been, we've been seeing. It's like nobody wants to think, if I'm a terrorist, sitting in my cave in Afghanistan, what are the cities in the United States that I've even heard of? And it's just, so You know, the whole idea of police in Lawrence or in Rappahannock in Virginia or some, you know, any of the smaller, you know, cities in our country, you know, being militarized, you know, and being ready for the terrorist attack on, you know, whatever there might be to attack is just a little bit, it's silly. You know, I think it's a way of pandering. It really is.
Thanks.
Are you here to tell me I should cut it short or? Okay.
Probably 2 more questions, please.
Dos más. Uno, dos.
Mr. Pitts,
Yes.
I would like to know your definition of American democracy. Open topic.
In 25 words or less, I think a democracy is actually fairly simple. One person, one vote. One adult person, one vote. I'm not sure quite what you're getting at. Representative government, which is supposed to be what we are about, although we seem to have been falling short of that a little bit over the last 2 national election cycles. Was that what you were getting at, or is there something? I sense something deeper and hidden and more profound in that question. Is that it?
That's good. Thank you.
I'm not sure where we're going. We're talking about redistricting, or, I mean, I'm not sure. Yes.
Mr. Pitts, as an educator and a writer who has been plagiarized, what's your opinion on anti-plagiarism software?
What's my opinion of anti-plagiarism software?
Yes, that requires students to submit their papers to online databases so that they
You know, I wish, you know, it'd be nice to believe that anti-plagiarism software is going to be successful. I'm familiar enough with the creativity of students and the vastness of the internet to believe that it can only be marginally effective, if that. I believe that the very fact that we have to have anti-plagiarism software sort of speaks to where we have fallen down in a lot of ways as a culture. I am reminded, I do pick on Kansas. I do pick on Kansas a lot, it occurs to me, because I wrote also about the teacher in Piper, Kansas. I've written about her at least once, possibly twice, you know, who got in trouble for failing students who cheated, which, you know, is not such a radical concept where I come from. But I think that, you know, where this, if we're looking for technology to solve this problem, we're going to be sorely disappointed. What's the word I'm looking for? It begins with a P. Plagiarism. See, he's getting old. The anti-plagiarism software that counts is here and here, you know. And if you don't have this, then, you know, none of the rest of it matters, you know. You don't plagiarize because it's wrong, not because you know that, you know, there's some handy-dandy doodad that'll catch you. You don't do it because it's wrong and because you think better of yourself as a writer than that. That should be enough right there. You know, are we you tell me.
Would you like to do a couple more?
We can do a couple more, sure. Okay. We'll do a couple more. Now 2 more. Now that was just a test. That was just a test. Now dos más. Yes.
Mr. Pitts.
Where's that coming from?
Over here.
Oh, okay, there you are.
You are a national symbol of the speaking out against social injustice, and I just want to ask you, as a teenager who has daydreams about organizing a protest march on Washington, and then finds himself suddenly playing a mind-numbing video game and wondering, how did I get here? Where do we start with this whole civil disobedience thing? I mean, what is the first step?
You want me to...
What can I do?
So that when you get arrested, you can blame me, right? I will put it to you like this, because the premise of your question sort of speaks to something I find very interesting. 40 years ago, and I was just a kid at that time, so I'm not going to, this is not like my generation. It's about a generation about 10 years or 15 years older than me. But 40 years ago, when young people were upset over sexism, when young people were upset over racism, when young people were upset over the war in Vietnam, they somehow managed to take it to the streets and to make their presence felt and to be a pressure, you know, sometimes not in very good ways, but to be a pressure on, you know, the political scene in this country. It fascinates me that kids of this era feel so anonymous or so disempowered or disenfranchised to do that, when you have on the corner of your desk in your dorm or wherever it is you are, I'm sure, you have a machine that they didn't have back then, by which you can communicate with the world, by which you can get information from around the world, by which you can disseminate whatever your thoughts and ideas are. You have that. They had a mimeograph machine and a bullhorn. So it's just fascinating to me that they were the ones who felt empowered to change the world, and that the generation that exists now that actually has more power on its desk than any 20 of them could have ever dreamt of feels a lack of power. I really don't understand that. I'm really trying to formulate thoughts on that. I don't know if it's that we've gotten fat and happy and comfortable. I don't know if it's that we have been made to feel sort of anonymous and unable to affect anything. I don't know if it's that we've watched too much reality TV and Paris Hilton and Britney Spears videos, and as Chuck D calls it, weapons of mass distraction. I really don't know. But I do know that you have, and I realize I'm repeating myself, but I want you to hear that you have power. You have power. 40 years ago, your counterpart had a mimeograph machine and organized a march and did all this. They had a mimeograph machine and a rotary dial telephone, and organized that march and got people out in the streets. There's something wrong with that picture when you have the power that you have. Not you personally, but your generation has the power that it has, and is wondering if it can make a difference. Of course you can. Of course you can.
Thank you very much.
Uno más. Yes.
Though I haven't read, I've heard that Seymour Hersh has interviewed people in the Bush administration that say plans are actively being made to bomb Iran. Now, in the most recent Harper's, Daniel Ellsberg suggests that those people should break with their oath of secrecy and come forward and with the documents and the plans. Do you think there's any likelihood of that sort of thing happening?
I tend to doubt it, but then, if you'd asked me a week ago, I would have doubted that there was a congressman that had a thing for 16-year-old boys on the internet. So, who knows? Who really knows? I do believe that plans are afoot for an invasion of Iran. I think that's pretty much an open secret. As to whether or not we go there, it depends on whether or not the people in charge of our country can convince themselves and then find a way of scaring the bejesus out of enough of us to make it possible. Who knows? But yeah, I think the plans are already afoot. And finally,
I was just wondering, what are your thoughts on the state of affairs in Sudan and the genocide in Darfur and the media's coverage of this?
My thoughts on the state of affairs in Sudan, the genocide in Darfur and the media's coverage? I think the genocide in Sudan and the situation in Darfur is horrific. I think it is appalling. I think it is frightening, and I think that for those of us who either lived through or at least read about or know something about the era of the Holocaust, it's a frightening echo, and unfortunately, and sad to say, not the first echo since the Holocaust ended, but a frightening echo. And I think that the world media have been criminally negligent. Forget the world media, the U.S. media have been criminally negligent in their lack of coverage of this. And the thing that really troubles me is that you look back from the perch of where we are now, and you look back on the people who did not do what should have been done when the Jews were being rounded up, and you say, oh my goodness, how could they? And there's some sense, I think, of moral superiority that attaches to that, how terrible those people were, that they didn't move when they should have, that they didn't do what they should have done. And I think that moral superiority is gonna go by the wayside, because 20, 30 years from now, people are gonna look back at us and say, not just here, but Rwanda, Bosnia, et cetera, and then Sudan, Darfur. How could you? How could you allow this to happen? How could you know this was happening and not scream bloody murder, not demand that your president or your representatives or somebody do something about this? People are, children, women, men, babies, boys are being killed, in the hundreds of thousands. Are we to 1 million yet? I forget the exact count, but if we're not at 1 million, we're darn close. I'm sorry?
I thought it was 400,000.
No, I think it's more than 400,000. I think we're well above 500,000, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be wrong. But how could we have watched this happen and done nothing? And it's interesting even to listen to us talk about, well, bandy the numbers about 400,000, 1 million, 500,000 or whatever. Think about that for a minute. I can't, let's take the low number. I cannot envision 400,000 dead people. Even at the low number, 400,000 is just an unthinkable number of people to have lost their lives while we sat by and did nothing.
What do you think can be done?
I think we need to pressure our president. Nick Kristof, the columnist for the New York Times, rather, did columns where he just periodically counted how many days went by without the president saying anything, about Darfur, and it's like, months went by. It was appalling, without saying anything. This is the humanitarian crisis of our age. We inflate Saddam Hussein, who was not a good guy, don't get me wrong, he was a terrible person, terrible tyrant, and a mass murderer, but we inflate him into the second coming of Adolf Hitler, and in the meantime, we have this carnage going on, in this African nation, and what is it, that they're, I know what it is, actually. There's no oil, the people have brown skin, and they didn't try to kill his daddy, I think, not just for this, but, for the war in Iraq, for a lot of things, history is going to judge us in this era. History is going to judge us harshly. Somebody asked me, get asked occasionally why I write columns, repeatedly hollering about the Bush administration and the things that are going on, the things that should be done that aren't being done. And it's not out of any belief that I'm going to change anything. It's frankly because in 20 years, history is going to look back on this era and say, how could you? And I want to be able to point to my columns and say, I shouted, I raised some noise, I did what I could. To me, that's basically all that's left. Thank you.